A curious shadow. The morning sun peeked through the lace curtains of Officer Daniel Wallace's modest suburban home, casting a soft glow across the kitchen. His wife, Jennifer, stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease, her auburn hair loosely tied back. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, his badge glinting in the light as it rested on the table beside him. "I'll never get tired of your cooking," Daniel said with a warm smile, watching Jennifer as she plated the pancakes. Jennifer chuckled, setting the plate in front of him. "I hope not. It's been 10 years of this." He winked at her, savoring the first bite. "Best 10 years of my life." Their peaceful morning was interrupted when Jennifer glanced out the window over the sink. A flash of movement caught her eye, a small figure standing across the street near the large oak tree. The figure was a little girl, no more than 7 years old, with dark skin and tightly coiled hair tied in small puffs. She stood there quietly, staring at the house, her big brown eyes focused intensely on Jennifer. "Honey," Jennifer called softly, her gaze still fixed on the girl. "There's a little girl outside, just standing there." Daniel turned to look out the window, but by the time he did, the girl was gone, leaving only the soft rustling of leaves in her wake. He shrugged. "Maybe she's new to the neighborhood, just curious." Jennifer nodded but couldn't shake the odd feeling. The girl's eyes had held something more, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "I don't know. It was like she was watching me, not just standing there." Daniel finished his breakfast and stood up, kissing Jennifer on the cheek before grabbing his badge. "I'll check around while I'm on patrol today. If she's new, someone will know her. Don't worry about it, okay?" Jennifer smiled, though the unease lingered in the back of her mind. "Okay, thanks." After Daniel left for his shift, Jennifer spent the day running errands. The grocery store was busier than usual, and as she made her way through the aisles, picking up milk and bread, that feeling returned, the feeling of being watched. Her eyes scanned the store and landed on the same little girl, peeking out from behind a cereal display. Jennifer's heart skipped a beat. There she was again, staring, her expression unreadable. Jennifer smiled gently, but before she could say anything, the girl darted behind the display and disappeared. Pushing her cart toward the back of the store, Jennifer looked around, trying to find her, but the girl was nowhere in sight. Back in the car, Jennifer tried to rationalize it. Maybe the child was shy or simply playing a game, but why did she feel so unnerved? It wasn't just the girl's appearance, but the way she watched, like she was waiting for something. Later that afternoon, Jennifer was volunteering at the community shelter, where she worked twice a week. They were hosting a small food drive, and the day had been busy with organizing donations and greeting people who came to help. But even there, amidst the laughter and chatter of volunteers, Jennifer felt that unsettling sense of being observed. As she helped stock shelves in the pantry, she caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye. She turned toward the door, and there, standing just outside the shelter, was the same little girl. She stood completely still, her eyes locked onto Jennifer through the glass door. Jennifer's heart raced. She set down the box of canned goods and slowly walked toward the door, determined to speak to the child this time. "Hey there," Jennifer called out softly as she stepped outside. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" The little girl didn't move. She stared at Jennifer for a long, quiet moment before her lips parted slightly, as if she was about to speak. But then, just as quickly as she appeared, the girl turned and ran down the street, disappearing into the shadows of a nearby alley. Jennifer stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. This wasn't just a random coincidence anymore. This little girl was following her. But why? What did she want? That evening, Jennifer sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window as dusk settled over the neighborhood. When Daniel returned from work, his face immediately softened when he saw the troubled expression on his wife's face. "Hey, everything okay?" he asked, setting down his keys. Jennifer shook her head slowly, still gazing out the window. "It's that girl again. I saw her at the grocery store, at the shelter. I tried talking to her, but she ran away. Daniel frowned, his instincts kicking in. She's following you. I don't know why. She looks so scared, but she won't say anything. It's like she's waiting for something, or someone. Daniel sat down beside her, taking her hand. That is strange. I'll check around the neighborhood again tomorrow, see if anyone knows her. In the meantime, maybe we should keep an eye out. It could be nothing, but you never know. Jennifer nodded, grateful for his calm, level-headed approach. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was going on. That little girl wasn't just lost or scared. There was something more, a mystery hidden behind those big brown eyes that was waiting to be uncovered. As Jennifer and Daniel prepared for bed that night, the weight of the girl's silent presence hung heavily in the air. And though they didn't speak of it again, both of them knew that the next encounter with the mysterious child might reveal far more than they were prepared for. Shadows of a secret. The morning was crisp, with a light fog curling around the edges of the neighborhood like the whispers of an unspoken truth. Jennifer stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the familiar street that now seemed so different. Daniel had already left for work, and though his words of reassurance lingered in her mind, they did little to ease the growing unease that had settled over her like a weight. She hadn't seen the girl again since the previous day, but she knew, deep down, something wasn't right. This child wasn't simply lost or curious. She was trying to communicate something, and Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was urgent. After tidying up the kitchen, Jennifer grabbed her purse and decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. Perhaps it would clear her head, help her make sense of the strange events of the past few days. The morning air was cool, and the quiet suburban streets seemed peaceful, but Jennifer's heart was restless. As she walked, her mind wandered back to the girl's eyes. Those deep, searching eyes that seemed too wise for a child her age. There was something about the way she looked at Jennifer, almost like she recognized her, like she knew something Jennifer didn't. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise, a rustling behind her. She turned quickly, her heart leaping into her throat. There, just a few steps away, partially hidden behind a hedge, was the little girl. Jennifer's breath caught in her chest. She hadn't heard her approach, hadn't seen her until now, but there she was, watching again. The girl's eyes, as always, were wide, filled with that same mixture of fear and longing. This time, Jennifer didn't wait for her to run. "Hey, wait," she called out softly, taking a step toward the girl. "It's okay. I just want to talk." The girl didn't move, but her eyes flicked nervously toward the street, as if she were weighing whether or not to flee. Jennifer could feel the tension in the air, the child's internal battle between staying and running. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jennifer said, keeping her voice gentle, trying to close the distance between them without startling her. "Are you lost? Do you need help? You don't have to be afraid." The little girl's lips trembled, and for a moment, Jennifer thought she might speak. But instead, the girl took a step back, retreating into the shadows. Jennifer's heart sank. "Please, I can help you," she urged, her voice laced with desperation. But just like before, the child turned and bolted, disappearing down a side street, her small figure quickly swallowed by the morning fog. Jennifer stood there for a moment, staring after her, frustration and worry gnawing at her. This wasn't normal. Children didn't just follow people around for days on end without a reason. Something was terribly wrong, and Jennifer knew she had to find out what it was. She hurried back home and grabbed her phone, dialing Daniel's number. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey, everything okay?" he asked, his voice slightly muffled as if he were in the middle of something. "I saw her again," Jennifer said, pacing the kitchen. "She was right there, Daniel, just watching me again. I tried to talk to her, but she ran off. I don't know what to do." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Jennifer could almost hear Daniel's mind working through the information. "Did she say anything this time?" he asked. "No, Nothing. She just ran. It's like she's scared of something, but I don't know what. Daniel sighed. I'll swing by the neighborhood on my lunch break, see if I can spot her. If I can talk to her, maybe I can figure out what's going on. Jennifer nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Thanks. I have a bad feeling about this, Daniel. I know, Jen. I'll handle it. Don't worry. But how could she not worry? Jennifer hung up the phone and sat down at the kitchen table, her mind racing. This little girl was following her for a reason, and Jennifer felt in her bones that whatever it was important. But why her? Why now? She couldn't sit still any longer. Grabbing her keys, Jennifer decided to drive to the shelter, hoping that maybe someone there might recognize the girl. She couldn't just let this go, not when it felt so urgent. The shelter was bustling with activity when Jennifer arrived, volunteers moving in and out, stacking boxes and organizing donations. She approached Linda, one of her close friends who worked there with her. Hey, Jennifer. Linda greeted her with a warm smile. Didn't expect to see you here today. Everything okay? Jennifer hesitated, unsure of how to explain the situation without sounding crazy. I've been seeing this little girl around the neighborhood. She started slowly. She's been following me, but she won't talk. I was hoping maybe someone here knows her, or at least knows if she's new around town. Linda's smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. That sounds strange. What does she look like? Jennifer described the girl as best as she could. Her age, her big brown eyes, her tightly coiled hair. As she spoke, she could see Linda's expression change, a flicker of recognition passing across her face. Actually, Linda said slowly, there was a little girl like that at the shelter about a week ago. She didn't say much, and no one seemed to know who she was. She just showed up, stood around for a while, and then disappeared. We thought maybe she was with one of the families we were helping, but no one claimed her. Jennifer's heart pounded. Do you know where she went? Did anyone see her leave? Linda shook her head. No, she just slipped out when no one was looking. It was strange, but we didn't think much of it at the time. Jennifer's mind raced. So the girl had been hanging around the shelter too, even before Jennifer had noticed her. But what was she doing there? Was she looking for someone? Thanks, Linda, Jennifer said, forcing a smile. I'll keep looking. As she left the shelter, the thought struck her. Maybe the girl had been looking for her all along. Maybe that was why she'd shown up at the shelter, and now she was following her around the neighborhood. But why? What did she want from Jennifer? Determined to find answers, Jennifer decided to drive to the nearest elementary school. If the girl lived in the area, surely someone at the school would recognize her. After all, a child couldn't go unnoticed forever. The school's principal, Mr. Evans, greeted Jennifer with a polite but puzzled expression when she asked if he had any students matching the description of the girl. I'm sorry, he said after checking the records. We don't have anyone by that description enrolled here. It's possible she's homeschooled or new to the area, but there's no one like that in our system. Jennifer thanked him and left the school, more confused than ever. How could a little girl just vanish, leaving no trace behind? No one knew her, no one had seen her, and yet she kept appearing, always watching, always silent. That evening, Daniel came home looking grim. He sat down across from Jennifer at the kitchen table, his expression serious. I couldn't find her, he said quietly. I checked the streets, asked around. No one's seen her. Jennifer's heart sank. She has to be out there, Daniel. She's not just a figment of my imagination. Daniel reached out, taking her hand. I believe you, but something's not adding up here. A little girl like that doesn't just slip through the cracks. Someone must know her. Jennifer stared out the window, her thoughts swirling. I don't think she's from around here. At least, not in the way we think. There's something else going on, something we're not seeing. Daniel squeezed her hand. I'll file a report in the morning. We'll get more eyes on this. If she's in trouble, we'll find her. As night fell, Jennifer found herself standing by the window again, peering out into the darkness. The street was empty, quiet, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the girl was still out there, watching, waiting. And for the first time, Jennifer wasn't just worried. She was afraid. The haunting truth. The next morning dawned with a heavy gray sky, thick clouds hanging low, as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable. Jennifer woke up with an uneasy feeling in her chest, the same one that had been gnawing at her for days. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the little girl would appear again today. After a quick breakfast, Jennifer found herself back at the kitchen window, staring out into the stillness of the street. She hadn't told Daniel how deep her worry had grown, but the weight of the girl's presence had become a burden she couldn't shake. Why was this child following her? What was she trying to say without words? As if the universe had heard her silent questions, there was a sudden movement across the street, just beyond the row of houses. Jennifer's heart skipped a beat. It was her again. The little girl stood on the corner, just barely visible through the misty morning haze. Her brown eyes, always wide and searching, were fixed directly on Jennifer. There was something haunting in her gaze, something that made Jennifer's skin prickle with dread. Without thinking, Jennifer grabbed her jacket and rushed outside, her feet moving faster than her mind. She needed to talk to this child. She needed answers. "Wait," Jennifer called as she jogged across the street, her voice shaky but determined. "Please, don't run. I just want to help." The girl, to Jennifer's surprise, didn't run. Instead, she remained rooted to the spot, her small body tense, her hands clenched at her sides. Jennifer slowed her pace as she approached, not wanting to scare her off again. The fog wrapped around them like a veil, muffling the distant sounds of the neighborhood. For a long moment, they stood there, facing each other in the empty street. Jennifer's breath hung in the cool air, and she felt her pulse quicken. She could see the girl more clearly now. Her skin was a rich brown, her hair pulled into small puffs that framed her face. Her clothes, though clean, looked worn and slightly too big for her frame. Jennifer knelt down to the girl's level, trying to soften her posture. "Hey there," she said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to know if you're okay." The little girl's eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe, or hesitation. But she didn't move. Jennifer took a slow breath, calming her own nerves before speaking again. "My name is Jennifer," she said softly. "What's your name?" For the first time, the girl's lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, her mouth trembled, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the courage. Jennifer's heart broke at the sight. This child was carrying something far too heavy for someone her age. "It's okay," Jennifer reassured her. "You don't have to be scared. You can trust me." The girl's eyes darted around, as if checking for unseen dangers. Her small hands trembled at her sides, and Jennifer could see the conflict on her face, the need to speak warring with her fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the girl whispered, "I'm Amara." Jennifer smiled, a wave of relief washing over her. "Amara. That's a beautiful name." Amara's gaze dropped to the ground, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her oversized sweater. She was so small, so fragile, and yet Jennifer sensed there was something much larger behind her silence, something hidden in the shadows of her past. "Are you lost, Amara?" Jennifer asked, keeping her tone light and non-threatening. "Do you live around here?" Amara shook her head, her movements small and uncertain. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jennifer's brow furrowed in concern. "Do you have a family? Someone who's looking for you?" Again, Amara shook her head. Her eyes filled with tears, and she wiped at them quickly, as if she didn't want to cry in front of Jennifer. The sight of the girl's tears tugged at Jennifer's heart. This wasn't just a case of a lost child. Something much deeper was going on here. But how could she help Amara if the girl wouldn't, or couldn't, tell her the full story? Jennifer was about to ask another question when Amara's eyes suddenly widened in fear. Her small body tensed, and she took a step back, glancing over Jennifer's shoulder. Jennifer turned quickly, her heart racing, expecting to see someone lurking nearby. But the street was empty, save for the quiet hum of distant traffic and the low fog rolling in. When she looked back, Amara was gone. Jennifer's chest tightened with frustration and worry. How did she keep slipping away so quickly? And why did she look so terrified? This wasn't just about Amara being lost. Jennifer could feel it now, in her bones. This child was running from something, or someone. Jennifer hurried back inside and immediately dialed Daniel's number. He picked up after a few rings, his voice tense. "Hey, what's going on?" "I saw her again," Jennifer said, trying to steady her voice. "Her name is Amara, and she's scared, Daniel. I don't know what's going on, but she's in trouble." "Did she say what's happening? Where she's from?" "No, not really. She wouldn't say much, but it's clear that she's running from something." She looked terrified. Daniel was silent for a moment. Jennifer could hear the faint sounds of the precinct in the background, the hum of radios, the chatter of officers. "Okay," he finally said. "I'll talk to my captain, see if we can get more resources to look into this. I don't want to spook her, though. If she's running from something dangerous, we need to be careful." Jennifer nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I agree. Just be careful, Daniel. There's something about this that feels wrong." "I'll be careful," Daniel promised. "And you should too. Keep an eye out, okay? If she shows up again, try not to push too hard. She'll come to you when she's ready." Jennifer hung up the phone and leaned against the counter, her mind racing. What was Amara so afraid of? And why had she chosen Jennifer? Of all the people in the neighborhood, why was she following her? That evening, as the sun began to set, Jennifer found herself standing by the window again, watching the street. It had become a habit now, a part of her routine, though she didn't expect to see Amara again so soon. The little girl had a way of appearing and disappearing like a ghost, always there, and yet never fully present. But as the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement, Jennifer spotted something out of the corner of her eye, a small figure slipping behind a parked car. Her heart pounded in her chest. Amara was back. Without hesitation, Jennifer grabbed her jacket and rushed outside. She couldn't let her get away again. "Amara," Jennifer called, scanning the street for any sign of the girl. "Please, wait." There was no answer, no movement, just the soft rustling of leaves in the cool evening breeze. Jennifer's pulse quickened as she approached the parked car where she'd seen the movement. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw the small figure crouched behind the car, her wide brown eyes peering out from the shadows. This time, Jennifer didn't kneel or speak. She simply stood there, watching the girl, giving her the space to decide whether or not to run. After a long, tense moment, Amara slowly stood up, her small frame barely visible in the dim light. She stared at Jennifer, her eyes filled with the same haunting mixture of fear and longing. "I won't hurt you," Jennifer said softly, holding out her hand. "I just want to help." Amara hesitated, her gaze flicking between Jennifer's outstretched hand and the dark street behind her. She looked like a child caught between two worlds, one of safety and one of danger, unable to choose. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Amara took a small step forward, then another, and another, until, at last, she reached out and placed her trembling hand in Jennifer's. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, unasked questions, and an understanding that went far deeper than either of them could articulate. Jennifer knelt down, looking into Amara's eyes. "You're safe with me," she whispered, squeezing the girl's hand gently. "I promise." But even as she said the words, Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that whatever danger Amara was running from was far from over. And soon, it would catch up with them both. Into the shadows, The evening had settled into a deep, oppressive silence by the time Jennifer led Amara into the house. The usual warmth of her home felt hollow, filled with the tension that had been building since the little girl first appeared. As they stepped inside, Jennifer could sense the shift in the air. Amara seemed nervous, her eyes darting around the room, as if she expected something, or someone, to come bursting through the door at any moment. Jennifer knelt down in front of her, trying to meet the girl's gaze, but Amara kept looking away, her small hand gripping the sleeve of her oversized sweater so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "It's okay," Jennifer said softly, her voice calm and soothing. "You're safe here, Amara." But even as she said it, Jennifer felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. She didn't know who or what Amara was running from, and the thought of unseen dangers lurking outside made her skin crawl. Amara glanced up at her, her eyes wide and fearful. "No, I'm not safe," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He'll find me." Jennifer's heart clenched at the fear in the girl's voice. "Who will find you, Amara? Who are you running from?" The little girl opened her mouth as if to speak, but then clamped it shut, shaking her head violently. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she wiped them away with the back of her hand, her small body trembling. Jennifer reached out, gently placing a hand on Amara's shoulder. "It's okay. You don't have to tell me right now. But I promise, whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Amara sniffled, her gaze dropping to the floor. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet ticking of the kitchen clock and the distant hum of traffic outside. Jennifer's mind raced with questions. Who was he? What had Amara gotten herself into that had made her so terrified? Jennifer's phone buzzed on the counter, and she stood up to check it. It was a message from Daniel. "On my way home. Any updates?" She quickly typed back. "She's here. Scared. Won't say much. Please hurry." After sending the message, Jennifer turned back to Amara, who was now standing in the middle of the living room, looking small and vulnerable. Her big brown eyes, once so filled with suspicion and fear, now seemed lost, as if she was desperately searching for something or someone to save her. "Are you hungry?" Jennifer asked, trying to shift the focus to something more immediate. "I can make you something to eat." Amara didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared at the floor, her hands twisting the fabric of her sweater nervously. Finally, she nodded, a small, hesitant gesture. Jennifer moved to the kitchen, keeping her movements slow and deliberate, as though she were dealing with a fragile, wounded animal. She prepared a simple sandwich, the rhythm of her actions helping to calm her own nerves. But even as she worked, the knot of worry in her stomach tightened. Why was Amara so afraid? What had happened to her? When Jennifer brought the plate over, Amara took the sandwich in her hands but didn't eat. She simply held it, staring at it as if it were a foreign object. Jennifer sat down across from her, watching her closely. "You don't have to be afraid," Jennifer said again, her voice gentle. "You can stay here as long as you need to. No one will hurt you." For a moment, Amara didn't respond. Then, in a voice so soft that Jennifer had to strain to hear it, the little girl whispered, "They already did." Jennifer's heart skipped a beat. "Who hurt you, Amara?" Amara's eyes filled with tears again, but she didn't answer. She just stared down at her hands, her shoulders hunched as if she were trying to make herself disappear. Jennifer leaned forward, her own voice trembling now. "Amara, please. I want to help, but I can't do that if I don't know what's going on." The girl sniffled, wiping her nose with her sleeve. She looked up at Jennifer, her eyes filled with a deep, unspoken pain that made Jennifer's chest tighten. For a moment, it seemed like Amara was going to open up, to tell her everything. But then, there was a sudden knock at the door, and the fragile moment shattered. Amara's body went rigid, her eyes wide with terror. She dropped the sandwich onto the floor, scrambling back toward the wall, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Jennifer's own heart pounded in her chest. She moved quickly toward the door, her mind racing. Who could it be at this hour? She looked through the peephole and felt a wave of relief wash over her when she saw Daniel standing on the porch. She quickly unlocked the door and pulled it open. "Thank God," Jennifer breathed. "She's terrified, Daniel. I don't know what's going on, but something's really wrong." Daniel stepped inside, his expression serious. His eyes immediately went to Amara, who was huddled in the corner of the living room, trembling like a leaf in the wind. He crouched down, trying to make himself appear as non-threatening as possible. "Hey, Amara," he said gently. "I'm Daniel. I'm here to help you. Okay, you're safe with us." Amara didn't respond. She just stared at him, her face pale, her whole body tense. Jennifer could see the fear in her eyes, the way her small hands clutched at her sweater, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. Daniel glanced up at Jennifer, his expression grim. "What did she say?" Jennifer shook her head. "Not much. She's scared, Daniel. Really scared. I think someone's been hurting her." Daniel's jaw tightened, and Jennifer could see the shift in him. The cop instinct taking over, the need to protect kicking into high gear. "Amara," Daniel said softly, turning his attention back to the girl. "You don't have to tell us everything right now, but we need to know if someone is looking for you. Is there someone dangerous out there?" Amara blinked, her tears spilling over. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then quickly shut it again, her body trembling with silent sobs. Daniel stood up, crossing the room in a few quick strides. He crouched beside her, speaking softly but firmly. "You're safe with us. No one can hurt you here, but I need you to help me, okay? I need to know who's after you so I can protect you." Amara finally lifted her gaze to meet his, and Jennifer saw something flicker in her eyes. Trust, or perhaps the hope of safety. But there was still fear there, deep and consuming. Amara began, her voice shaky. "I'd ran away." Daniel nodded, his expression gentle. "That's okay. It's good that you came to us. Who did you run away from?" Amara's lips quivered, and her breath hitched. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, looking down at the floor as if she couldn't bear to meet his gaze. "The man," she whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost inaudible. He said he would come for me if I told anyone." Jennifer's blood ran cold. A man. Someone had been after her. Someone dangerous enough to make this little girl believe that no place was safe, not even the home of a police officer. Daniel's expression hardened, but his voice remained calm. "Amara, I promise you, no one is going to hurt you, but I need to know who this man is. Can you tell me his name?" Amara shook her head quickly, her eyes wide with terror. No, he'll find me. He always finds me." Jennifer's heart broke at the fear in the girl's voice. What kind of person would do this to a child? And why was she so convinced that no matter where she went, this man would catch up to her? Daniel took a slow breath, trying to steady himself. "Okay, you don't have to say his name right now. But I need you to trust us, Amara. We can protect you. I can call for backup. We'll keep you safe, but we need to know more. Is this man someone you know? Someone close to your family?" Amara hesitated, her small hands twisting nervously. Then, in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper, she said, "He's not my family. He took me." The words hit Jennifer like a punch to the gut. Took her. She had been kidnapped. Daniel's face grew even more serious. "Amara," he said, his voice low but firm, "if someone took you, we need to find them. We need to stop them before they can hurt anyone else." Amara stared at him, her eyes brimming with tears. But he'll find me," she repeated, her voice filled with a quiet desperation. Jennifer stepped forward, kneeling beside her. "He won't find you," she said firmly, her heart aching at the sight of the terrified girl. "Not here. You're safe with us." For the first time, Amara looked up at Jennifer with something other than fear in her eyes. It was hope, fragile and tentative, but there nonetheless. Before anyone could say anything more, the sound of a car engine outside caught their attention. Jennifer's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and the timing felt too strange to be a coincidence. Daniel's expression shifted immediately. His hand went to his belt, where his service weapon was holstered. He glanced at Jennifer, his eyes full of warning. "Stay here," he said quietly, moving toward the door. Jennifer's pulse quickened as she stepped back, pulling Amara closer to her. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Daniel peered out the window, his body tense, his jaw clenched. "Jennifer," he called over his shoulder, his voice low and urgent. "Get Amara upstairs. Now." A dangerous revelation. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat as she heard Daniel's urgent command. The gravity of the situation hit her like a wave, and she instinctively pulled Amara close, her pulse racing. The little girl's eyes were wide with terror, and Jennifer could feel her tiny body trembling against her. "Come on, sweetheart," Jennifer whispered, keeping her voice calm even though her own heart was pounding. "We need to go upstairs. We'll be safe up there." Amara didn't resist, but her face was pale, her eyes darting toward the door, as though expecting someone to burst through at any moment. Jennifer gently guided her toward the stairs, moving as quickly and quietly as she could. Every creak of the wooden steps sent a fresh jolt of fear through her, but she kept her pace steady, her hand firmly gripping Amara's small one. As they reached the top of the stairs, Jennifer led Amara into the guest room, the one furthest from the front of the house. She crouched down in front of the girl, placing her hands on her shoulders. "I want you to stay in here, okay? No matter what you hear, stay quiet. I'll come back for you, I promise," Jennifer said, her voice steady despite the knot of fear tightening in her chest. Amara nodded, her eyes wide and filled with trust, though Jennifer could see the fear lurking beneath the surface. She gave the girl one last reassuring squeeze on the shoulder before quietly closing the door behind her. She couldn't bear the thought of Amara being in harm's way, but she also knew that she needed to check on Daniel, and whatever threat had just arrived at their doorstep. Jennifer's mind raced as she made her way back down the stairs, moving cautiously. Her footsteps were light, her breath shallow, as she approached the living room. She could hear Daniel's low voice, tense and authoritative, but she couldn't make out what he was saying. She inched closer to the front window and peeked through the curtains. A dark sedan was parked in front of the house, its engine still running. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside, but the mere sight of the car made Jennifer's heart pound harder. There was something about the way the car sat there, ominous, out of place, that sent a chill down her spine. Whoever was inside hadn't come here by accident. Jennifer slipped into the hallway, where Daniel was standing by the door, one hand resting on his holstered weapon. His eyes were locked on the car, and his body was tense, every muscle coiled and ready for action. He didn't turn when Jennifer approached, but his voice was low and urgent. "You should have stayed upstairs with her," Daniel said, his eyes never leaving the car. "I couldn't just sit there," Jennifer replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who is it? Do you think it's him?" "I don't know yet," Daniel said, his jaw clenched. "But whoever it is, they're not here for a friendly visit." Suddenly, the car door opened. A man stepped out, dressed in a dark suit that seemed far too formal for the quiet suburban street. He stood still for a moment, surveying the house, his posture calm but predatory, like a wolf assessing its prey. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but even from a distance, Jennifer could see the coldness in his eyes. Daniel's hand tightened around his gun, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. He needed to assess the situation, to figure out who this man was, and what he wanted before making a move. The man started walking toward the house, his steps slow and deliberate. Each one echoed in the quiet night, sending a ripple of tension through the air. Jennifer's heart raced, her mind spinning with possibilities. Was this the man who had taken Amara? Was this the one she was so terrified of? Just as the man reached the front steps, Daniel opened the door, stepping out onto the porch. His stance was firm, protective, as if he were already placing himself between the man and his family. "Can I help you?" Daniel's voice was cold, professional, but Jennifer could sense the barely restrained anger simmering beneath the surface. The man paused at the base of the steps, his gaze flicking up to meet Daniel's. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was palpable, a silent battle of wills. "I'm not here to cause any trouble, Officer Wallace," the man said, his voice smooth, like oil slicking over water. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just looking for something that belongs to me." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "This is my property. There's nothing here that belongs to you." The man's smile widened, though it remained cold. "I believe there is. A little girl, perhaps. Goes by the name Amara." Jennifer's blood ran cold. Her heart pounded so loudly in her ears that she almost didn't hear Daniel's sharp intake of breath. This was him. This was the man Amara had been running from. Daniel's posture shifted subtly, his hand moving a fraction closer to his weapon. "You're mistaken," he said, his voice hard. "There's no one here by that name." The man's smile faded slightly, replaced by a thin, calculating look. He took a step closer to the porch, his eyes glinting with a dangerous gleam. "Let's not play games, officer. I know she's here, and I know why she ran. But this isn't a matter for the police. It's personal." Daniel didn't flinch. "If you know anything about Amara, you'll know that she's under my protection now. You have no business with her." The man chuckled, though the sound was devoid of any real amusement. "Protection? You think you can protect her from me?" He shook his head slowly. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, officer. This is bigger than you, bigger than her." Daniel's jaw clenched, but before he could respond, the man's gaze shifted, just for a second, toward the house, toward where Jennifer stood just inside the door. She froze, her breath catching in her throat as his eyes seemed to pierce through the walls, searching, knowing. "You think you can hide her in there?" the man said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think that door will keep me out?" Jennifer's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the scene unfold, every instinct in her body screaming for her to run upstairs, to check on Amara, to hide her away where this man could never find her. But she couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear and anger, and the desperate need to protect this little girl who had come into her life. Daniel took a step forward, blocking the man's view of the house, his body a shield between the intruder and his home. "I suggest you leave now," Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous, "before this becomes a matter for the police." The man's smile returned, but it was darker now, laced with menace. "You're making a mistake, officer. You have no idea who you're protecting." "Try me," Daniel shot back, his tone cold as ice. For a long, tense moment, the two men stared each other down. Jennifer could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the danger hanging thick in the air. But then, just as quickly as the tension had built, the man's posture relaxed. He took a step back, raising his hands in a mock gesture of surrender. "Fine," the man said, his voice light, but with a sinister edge. "I'll leave, for now. But this isn't over. I will find her, and when I do, no one will be able to stop me." He turned and walked back to his car, his footsteps slow and deliberate, as though he had all the time in the world. He got into the car, and without another word, the engine roared to life. The dark sedan pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the night, leaving only the echo of its departure behind. Daniel stood on the porch for a moment, his body tense, his hand still hovering near his gun. Then, slowly, he let out a breath and turned back toward the house. Jennifer stepped forward, her voice shaky. "Daniel, who was that man?" Daniel shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know, but we're not dealing with just a runaway child here. This is something bigger." Jennifer's stomach twisted in knots. What do we do now? We call for backup, Daniel said, his voice firm. We're going to need protection. Around the clock. Whoever he is, he's dangerous. And he's not going to give up easily. Jennifer swallowed hard, her mind racing. Amara was upstairs, alone, and the man who had just stood on their doorstep was intent on taking her back. Whoever he was, whatever he wanted, he wasn't going to stop until he had her. I'll call the captain, Daniel said, already reaching for his phone. We're going to need all the help we can get. As Daniel made the call, Jennifer turned and hurried up the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached the guest room and quietly opened the door, her eyes scanning the room for Amara. The little girl was sitting on the bed, her knees pulled up to her chest, her small frame trembling. She looked up as Jennifer entered, her eyes wide with fear. Is he gone? Amara whispered, her voice barely audible. Jennifer crossed the room and knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around the trembling child. Yes, sweetheart, he's gone. But don't worry, he won't find you. Not here. But even as she said the words, Jennifer couldn't shake the gnawing fear that this was far from over. The man had left, but his parting words echoed in her mind. I will find her, and when I do, no one will be able to stop me. Amara buried her face in Jennifer's shoulder, her small body racked with silent sobs. Jennifer held her tightly, her heart breaking for the little girl who had been through so much already. Don't worry, Jennifer whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. We're going to protect you, no matter what. But even as she made the promise, Jennifer couldn't help but wonder, how far would this man go to get what he wanted? And how could they protect Amara from someone who seemed capable of anything? A reckoning in the night. The following days passed in a blur of tension and fear. Daniel had kept his word, calling in backup from the police department and arranging for a patrol car to monitor the house at all hours. But despite the extra security, a heavy sense of dread lingered in the air, as if the shadow of the man who had come to their door was still hovering over them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Jennifer barely slept, her mind constantly racing with worry about Amara. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant noise outside made her heart race with fear that the man had returned to take her. She had kept Amara close, making sure the little girl was never alone, not even for a second. But despite her best efforts to reassure her, Jennifer could see the fear in Amara's eyes growing stronger with each passing day. Daniel was on edge too. His usual calm demeanor had given way to a quiet intensity, his every movement charged with a sense of vigilance. He spent hours on the phone, talking with his captain, coordinating security measures, and looking into every possible lead on the man who had shown up at their doorstep. But so far, they had come up empty. The man seemed to have vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving no trace behind. On the fourth night after the confrontation, Jennifer was sitting at the kitchen table with Amara, helping her with a jigsaw puzzle in an effort to keep her distracted. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heater and the occasional crackle of the police radio on the counter. Daniel was in the living room, talking quietly on the phone with one of his colleagues. Amara was unusually quiet, her small hands slowly turning over the puzzle pieces without much focus. Jennifer could see the weight of the past few days pressing down on her. The little girl was exhausted, her face pale, dark circles forming under her eyes. She hadn't slept much since the man had come to the house, and every sound outside seemed to send her into a state of quiet panic. Jennifer reached over and placed a comforting hand on Amara's shoulder. "You're doing great," she said softly, trying to coax a smile from her. "We'll have this puzzle done in no time." Amara looked up at her, her eyes filled with sadness and fear. "I don't think he's ever going to stop," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jennifer's heart ached at the hopelessness in Amara's voice. She knelt down beside her, meeting the girl's gaze. "He's not going to get to you," Jennifer said firmly. "Daniel, and I won't let that happen. You're safe here, I promise." Amara didn't respond. She just stared at the puzzle pieces, her small fingers tracing the edge of one as though lost in thought. Before Jennifer could say anything more, Daniel entered the kitchen, his face grim. He crossed the room quickly and placed a hand on Jennifer's shoulder. "I just got off the phone with the captain," Daniel said quietly. "There's been a development." Jennifer's pulse quickened. What kind of development? Daniel glanced at Amara, who was watching them both with wide eyes. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a low voice. "We think we know who the man is." Jennifer's breath caught in her throat. "Who is he?" Daniel exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting back to Jennifer. "His name is Marcus Wells. He's a known trafficker, human trafficking, specifically children. He's been on the FBI's radar for years, but he always manages to slip through the cracks. We think Amara is one of the children he took." Jennifer's stomach turned, a sick feeling washing over her. "Oh my God." She looked at Amara, who was now sitting very still, her face pale. He took me from my mom," Amara whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know where she is. I've been with him for so long. I don't even know how I got away." Jennifer knelt beside Amara again, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "You're so brave, Amara. You did the right thing by running. We're going to find your mom, I promise. But for now, you're safe." Amara clung to Jennifer, her small body shaking with silent sobs. Jennifer held her tightly, her heart breaking for the little girl who had endured so much. Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. "We have enough to bring Marcus in, but it won't be easy. He's dangerous, and if he knows the police are onto him, he'll disappear again." Jennifer nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "What do we do?" "We've increased surveillance, and I've put in a request for undercover officers to monitor the neighborhood," Daniel said. "But I don't think he's going to wait much longer. He knows Amara is here, and he's going to come back for her." A chill ran down Jennifer's spine. "How long do you think we have?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Not long." That night, after putting Amara to bed, Jennifer and Daniel sat together in the living room, the weight of the situation pressing down on them like a heavy blanket. The house was quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. "We need a plan," Daniel said, his voice low. "Marcus won't stop until he gets her. We need to be ready." Jennifer nodded, her mind racing. "But how? If he's as dangerous as you say, we can't just sit here and wait for him to show up." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I've been thinking about that. If Marcus is coming back, he's going to try to catch us off guard. We need to be one step ahead of him." Jennifer's heart pounded in her chest. "What are you thinking?" "I'll call the captain in the morning and ask for a direct surveillance team to be stationed nearby. We'll also need to fortify the house as best we can, locks, security cameras, alarms. If Marcus tries anything, we'll be ready." Jennifer swallowed hard, her mind swirling with fear and determination. "Okay, whatever it takes." As they prepared for bed, Jennifer couldn't shake the image of Amara's terrified face from her mind. The little girl had been through so much already, and now they were facing the very real possibility that Marcus would come back to take her. Jennifer knew that if he succeeded, they might never see Amara again. She lay awake for hours, listening to the quiet hum of the night, every sound outside sending a fresh jolt of fear through her. She didn't know how long she had been lying there when she suddenly heard it, a faint noise from outside, like the crunch of gravel beneath tires. Her heart leaked into her throat. She sat up in bed, straining to hear. There it was again, a low rumble, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the driveway. Jennifer's blood turned to ice. She reached over and shook Daniel awake, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel, someone's outside." Daniel was immediately alert. He grabbed his gun from the nightstand and quickly slipped out of bed, moving toward the window. He peered outside, his body tense. "There's a car parked down the street," he whispered. "It could be him." Jennifer's pulse raced. "What do we do?" "Stay here," Daniel said, his voice firm. "I'm going to check it out." Before Jennifer could protest, Daniel was already moving toward the door. He slipped quietly down the stairs, and Jennifer followed, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't let him face this alone, not when Marcus could be right outside. As they reached the front door, Daniel motioned for Jennifer to stay back. He slowly cracked the door open, peering outside into the darkened street. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, no movement, no sound. But then, in the distance, Jennifer saw it. A figure moving through the shadows, making its way toward the house. Jennifer's heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. "It's him," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded, his hand tightening around his gun. "Stay inside," he said quietly. "Lock the door behind me. Call the police." Jennifer's mind screamed at her to pull him back, to keep him inside where it was safe. But she knew Daniel couldn't just stand by. He had to protect them. She nodded, her hand shaking as she reached for her phone. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel gave her a brief, reassuring nod before slipping out into the night, the door closing softly behind him. Jennifer stood frozen for a moment, her heart racing. Then, with trembling hands, she locked the door and quickly dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, but Jennifer could barely focus on the words as she explained the situation, her eyes fixed on the window where Daniel had disappeared into the darkness. Seconds felt like hours as she waited, the silence of the house pressing in on her. She glanced up the stairs, her heart aching with worry for Amara, who was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the danger lurking outside. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the front yard, followed by the unmistakable sound of raised voices. Jennifer's heart leaped into her throat. She rushed to the window and saw Daniel struggling with the figure, Marcus, just feet from the front steps. Before she could process what was happening, the roar of approaching sirens filled the night air. Red and blue lights flashed as a police car sped down the street, pulling to a stop in front of the house. Officers rushed out, guns drawn, shouting commands. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat as she watched the chaotic scene unfold. Daniel had Marcus pinned to the ground, but the man was fighting back with a ferocity that made Jennifer's blood run cold. It was clear now, Marcus wasn't going to give up easily. The police officers quickly closed in, pulling Marcus away from Daniel and cuffing him. The struggle ended as suddenly as it had begun, and the officers hauled Marcus to his feet, shoving him into the back of the patrol car. Jennifer let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She opened the door and rushed outside, her heart pounding with relief as she saw Daniel standing there, breathing hard but unharmed. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling as she reached him. Daniel nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I'm fine. It's over. They got him." Jennifer's knees felt weak with relief, and she leaned into Daniel's embrace, her heart finally beginning to slow. It was over. Marcus was caught. Amara was safe. The officers stayed for a while, taking statements and securing the area, but Jennifer barely registered any of it. Her mind was focused on one thing: Amara. She hurried back inside, rushing up the stairs to the guest room where Amara was still asleep. When she opened the door, the little girl stirred, her eyes blinking open in the dim light. "Is he gone?" Amara whispered, her voice trembling. Jennifer knelt beside the bed, her eyes brimming with tears. "Yes, sweetheart. He's gone. You're safe now." Amara's eyes filled with relief, and she reached out, wrapping her arms around Jennifer in a tight hug. Jennifer held her close, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and protectiveness. Amara was safe, and Jennifer knew, without a doubt, that they would never let anything like this happen to her again. In the days that followed, the full extent of Marcus's crimes came to light. He had been part of a human trafficking ring, and Amara had been one of many children taken from their families. But with his capture, the authorities were able to dismantle the operation, and Amara's future, once so uncertain, was now filled with hope. As for Amara's mother, It took weeks of searching, but the police were finally able to locate her. She had been searching for her daughter all this time, unaware that Amara had escaped the clutches of the man who had taken her. The reunion between mother and daughter was emotional, filled with tears and joy, and it was a moment that Jennifer would never forget. But even as Amara was reunited with her mother, Jennifer and Daniel couldn't help but feel a deep connection to the little girl who had come into their lives. They had protected her, cared for her, and in some ways, they had become her family too. The day Amara left with her mother, Jennifer stood on the front porch, watching as the car pulled away. There was a bittersweet ache in her chest, but she knew that Amara's story was far from over. This was just the beginning of a new chapter for her, a chapter filled with love, safety, and healing. Daniel stepped up beside Jennifer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "She'll be okay," he said softly. "She's strong." Jennifer nodded, leaning into him. "I know, but I'm going to miss her." "We both will," Daniel said, his voice filled with emotion. "But we did what we set out to do. We kept her safe." As the car disappeared down the street, Jennifer felt a sense of peace wash over her. Amara was safe, and though the road ahead would be long, filled with challenges and healing, she knew that Amara would face it with the same courage she had shown since the day she first appeared at their door. Jennifer smiled softly, wiping away a tear. "We did good," she whispered, her heart full of gratitude and hope for the future.